The nights had grown longer on Thaddeus Bell's land, long enough that shadows seemed to stretch and breathe, and the wind whispered through the rotting wood of the old barn like it carried secrets older than memory. Thaddeus was a rancher, not much given to superstition, but even a practical man notices when something feels wrong. And what felt wrong began with Pasta, his old faithful dog, and the way he started staring at the barn every single night. It wasn't just a glance, or the restless pacing Pasta sometimes did when coyotes howled in the distance. This was different. Pasta would sit stiff as a fence post, muscles tense, yellow eyes locked on the barn door, as if he were watching something Thaddeus couldn't see. No growl, no bark, just an endless, silent stare that lasted from sundown until dawn. It started about 2 weeks back, quietly enough that Thaddeus didn't think much of it. But every evening since, Pasta was there, rooted to the same patch of dirt, ignoring his dinner, ignoring everything but that barn. The barn itself had been empty since the summer storms took the roof in places and let the rain rot the beams. Martha used to say that building had a soul, but Martha was gone now, and the barn was little more than rusted nails and memories. Thaddeus couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine every time he caught Pasta out there, eyes unblinking, ears flicking only when the breeze turned sharp. Something about it gnawed at Thaddeus in a way that sweat and hard work couldn't shake off. One evening, Thaddeus stepped off the porch, wiping his hands on his trousers after chopping wood. The sun was bleeding out behind the hills, and sure enough, there was Pasta, staring at the barn door like it might open any second. "What do you see, old friend?" Thaddeus asked softly, though he didn't expect an answer. Pasta's ears twitched, but his gaze never wavered. His whole body trembled just enough that Thaddeus could see it in the failing light. It was as if the dog was caught between duty and dread. Thaddeus stood beside him for a while, following his gaze, seeing nothing but the crooked doorway and sagging walls. There were no footprints in the dust, no signs of critters sneaking in at night. The barn had been empty since the cattle were sold off the year Martha died. But the feeling that something unseen lurked there grew heavier with every night. Pasta kept his vigil. The neighbors were too far off to see the strange sight. Only Thaddeus knew how the dog would whimper, low and restless, as dawn approached, or how he refused to sleep in the house anymore, choosing instead to collapse near the yard. Once morning came. Even the crows seemed to avoid the barn roof, circling wide before perching elsewhere. One night, as a cold wind curled around the porch posts, Thaddeus couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed a lantern and made his way toward the barn. The dry grass rustled under his boots, and the boards groaned as if warning him away. Pasta stayed where he was, tail low, eyes wide, body shaking so badly Thaddeus thought the old dog might collapse. It was the first time Thaddeus had ever seen fear in Pasta's eyes, and that scared him more than anything. Standing at the barn door, lantern held high, Thaddeus peered inside. Dust floated in the narrow beam of light, and the smell of mold and old hay rose to meet him. The stalls stood empty, the tools rusted and forgotten. Everything looked the same as it had for years. He called out softly, more to break the silence than because he expected a reply. The barn gave nothing back but its own emptiness. He stepped inside, the floor creaking under his weight. The lantern threw shadows against the walls, twisting familiar shapes into something strange. For a heartbeat, he thought he heard scratching. Just faint, like something brushing against wood from beneath. But when he stopped and listened, there was nothing, only his own heartbeat drumming in his ears. The next morning, Pasta was back, at his post before the sun had fully cleared the horizon. His ribs showed more each day, and he barely touched his food. Thaddeus watched him from the kitchen window, coffee cold in his hands, dread sinking deeper into his bones. The thought that something was buried out there, something so awful, it kept a loyal dog awake every night, wouldn't leave his mind. By the third week, Thaddeus noticed something else. A patch of earth near the barn side looked different, darker, softer, as though it had been disturbed. His breath caught in his chest. Nobody came out this far. Nobody but him and Pasta. And yet, there it was. Fresh soil where none should be. Pasta's reaction told him all he needed to know. The old dog stood there, ears flat, tail tucked, a low whine caught in his throat. His paws shuffled backward as Thaddeus approached the spot, but he wouldn't leave. As if duty and fear were locked in a battle inside him. Kneeling by the disturbed earth, Thaddeus brushed aside the loose dirt. His fingertips met something solid, something that didn't belong in the ground of an old barnyard. The air felt heavier, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. Pasta whimpered again, the sound sharp and broken. Thaddeus sat back on his heels, lanterns swinging gently beside him, the shadows dancing on rotting boards. In that moment, he knew something waited beneath the soil, something that had been calling to Pastor night after night. Whatever it was, it had been hidden for a reason, and some secrets aren't meant to stay buried forever. He didn't finish digging, not yet. His heart hammered too loud in his chest, and fear settled in like a chill he couldn't shake. Pastor wouldn't stop staring at the spot, as if he knew what was buried there would change everything. And Thaddeus, for the first time in years, felt truly afraid of what the dawn might reveal. Whatever lay under that patch of earth had a story, and by the look in Pastor's weary eyes, it wasn't a story that ended well. Thaddeus didn't sleep that night. The old ranch house felt colder than usual, the walls creaking like they were trying to speak truths he wasn't ready to hear. Pastor stayed on the porch, facing the barn with the same tense stare. Every now and then, the dog let out a soft, broken whine, but he never moved an inch. Thaddeus watched him through the kitchen window, coffee cooling in his hand, mind heavy with questions that circled but found no answers. The next morning, as the first pale light spilled over the fields, Thaddeus returned to the patch of disturbed earth, his breath misted in the chill air, and Pastor limped after him, staying close but still refusing to cross that invisible line near the barn's edge. Thaddeus knelt by the spot, his knees sinking into the loose soil, and brushed aside more dirt. What he uncovered sent a tremor up his spine. Rough fabric, damp and stained, wrapped tight around something solid. His heart pounded as he leaned closer, the sour smell of wet earth, mixing with something older, something that made his stomach turn. He couldn't bring himself to unwrap it fully. Instead, he stepped back, wiping dirt from his hands, trying to steady his breathing. The weight of the moment pressed down on him. This wasn't just something someone buried and forgot. Someone had hidden this for a reason strong enough to risk being found out later. Memories of Martha washed over him like a sudden gust. The way she'd paused near the barn door, her expression thoughtful, almost worried. The barn had been part of her family long before Thaddeus came along. Her father built it with his own hands, back when the ranch was thriving and laughter filled the house. But after her passing, the building had stood silent, gathering dust and secrets. And now, Pastor had sensed one of those secrets scratching to be let out. That evening, Thaddeus tried to focus on his chores. But every sound felt sharper, every shadow seemed to shift at the corner of his vision. As dusk settled, he saw Pastor freeze again, body stiff and ears locked on the barn. The dog trembled, muscles bunching like he was ready to bolt or fight. And then Thaddeus heard it too. Faint, but real this time. A slow, deliberate scratching sound from inside the barn walls, as though something buried deeper was trying to claw its way free. Heart racing, Thaddeus grabbed his lantern and stepped toward the barn. The boards moaned underfoot, the smell of mold stronger than before. The scratching stopped the moment he opened the door, replaced by a silence that felt heavier than any noise. He swept the light across the rotting stalls, over rusted tools, past the broken rafters where owls sometimes perched. Nothing moved, but the feeling didn't fade. The sense that something, or someone, had been waiting for him. Later that night, unable to rest, he rummaged through old boxes Martha had kept in the attic. Dust settled on his shoulders as he opened brittle letters and faded photographs. One name kept appearing in Martha's careful handwriting. Delilah, Martha's younger sister, who vanished years ago. Rumors had said she ran off, but Martha never believed that. She used to sit on the porch, eyes fixed on the barn, whispering that some truths find their way home eventually. Thaddeus felt his throat tighten. What if Delilah had come home? What if what lay beneath that soil wasn't just an old secret, but a part of Martha's family lost to time and tragedy? His hand shook as he set the letters aside. Pastor, lying at his feet, whined softly, as though sensing his master's thoughts. At dawn, Thaddeus returned to the barn. Pastor stayed back, hackles raised, tail low. Kneeling, Thaddeus dug deeper, pulling the canvas aside. Cold air spilled from the earth, carrying a smell of decay that nearly turned his stomach. Beneath the rough fabric, something pale caught the morning light. His fingers brushed against it, and he froze, bone, smooth and cold. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to keep going. Slowly, the shape of a delicate hand emerged, bone-wrapped still in scraps of cloth, a thin bracelet dangling loose around the wrist. He stumbled backward, breath ragged. Someone was buried here, hidden in the earth he'd walked across for years. His mind reeled. Delilah, another woman, and who had done this, and why? Pastor whimpered, backing away. body shaking so badly his paws slipped on the dirt. The same day, Thaddeus decided to ride out to the nearest neighbor, old Ezra Crow, who lived 5 miles south. Ezra was a man of few words, but he'd known Martha's family well. Maybe he'd heard something all those years ago. Thaddeus saddled his horse, the morning air sharp against his face, and Pastor trotted beside him, limping but refusing to be left behind. Ezra greeted him on the porch, eyes sharp under bushy brows. They shared quiet words over coffee. When Thaddeus mentioned finding something buried near the barn, Ezra's expression changed just enough to catch a flicker of something cold, calculating. He asked questions, too many, about what exactly Thaddeus had uncovered, about whether Thaddeus planned to tell anyone else. The way he spoke made Thaddeus's skin crawl. Riding home, Thaddeus couldn't shake the feeling that Ezra knew more than he let on. Back at the ranch, Pastor was pacing near the barn, head low, ears pinned. That night, Thaddeus couldn't sleep. Each creak of the house made him flinch. The scratching sound returned, louder this time, as if the earth itself was whispering secrets he'd never wanted to know. Near midnight, a glint caught his eye in the dirt by the barn, something small and silver. Digging gently, he unearthed a locket, tarnished with age, but still holding a trace of shine. Inside, a photograph of a woman smiled back at him. Young, dark hair, soft features that bore a family resemblance to Martha. His chest tightened. The initials on the back, Dr. Delilah Rhodes, Martha's sister. The weight of it settled on Thaddeus like a stone. This was no stranger buried near his barn. This was family, hidden away under dust and silence for years. Pastor sat beside him, head bowed, low tail brushing the dirt. His eyes met Thaddeus's, wide and solemn, as though urging him to see the truth. But before Thaddeus could even begin to understand why Delilah lay buried there, a sound cut through the night. Hoofbeats hard and fast, coming up the south road. Pastor rose, fur bristling, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest. Thaddeus's heart slammed in his chest as he turned toward the dark horizon, the distant shape of a rider growing clearer with every passing second. The hoofbeats thundered, closer, echoing against the barn walls, until Thaddeus felt them in his chest. Pastor's growl deepened, his body stiff as he placed himself squarely between Thaddeus and the approaching rider. In the pale moonlight, the rider came into view, Ezra Crow, sitting high in his saddle, his face harder than iron, eyes glinting with something colder than anger. Ezra reined in, staring down at Thaddeus without a word. The silence stretched, thick and sharp. Finally, Ezra spoke, voice low and rough. "I see you found what shouldn't have been found." His gaze flicked to the disturbed earth near the barn, to the half-dug grave and the glint of the locket still in that hand. Thaddeus swallowed hard. "It's Delilah, isn't it?" His voice cracked, heavy with the weight of the name. Martha's sister, buried and forgotten, in the place she should have been safest. Ezra dismounted slowly, boots crunching on dry earth. "She didn't know when to stop asking questions," he said, almost as if reciting something he'd told himself for years. "And you weren't supposed to find her, Thaddeus. Not after all this time." The truth fell into place, bitter and heavy. Ezra had buried Delilah here, right under Thaddeus's feet, trusting that grief, weather, and time would keep her secret. Pastor had known all along. The dog's sleepless nights, his trembling stare, he'd felt the presence of what lay beneath. "I reckon it was you who made her disappear," Thaddeus said, voice low but steady. "For what? Land? Money? Or just because she knew too much?" Ezra's jaw tightened. "Your wife's family had claims on that silver mine up north," he spat. "Delilah got too close to the truth. And your wife, God rest her soul, never stopped wondering. I had to end it before it ruined everything." The words hung in the air like smoke. Thaddeus felt a hot rush of anger and sorrow. Memories of Martha's quiet sadness, now sharper than ever. All those years she'd looked toward the barn, sensing something was wrong but never knowing how deep the betrayal ran. Ezra stepped closer, hand drifting toward the revolver at his side. Pastor snarled, muscles rippling beneath his coat, ready to defend his master with the last breath he had. Thaddeus felt fear claw at his chest, but something steadier rose to meet it. The simple need to do what was right. "You're not hiding her again, Ezra," Thaddeus said, voice shaking but resolute. "Not this time." Ezra's eyes hardened, fingers closing around the gun handle, but Pastor lunged first, a blur of fur and fury. The dog crashed into Ezra's legs, knocking him off balance. Ezra's revolver fired, the shot cracking the still night air, but it went wide, splintering the barn door. Thaddeus grabbed a shovel, lying nearby, and swung, striking Ezra's arm and sending the gun skittering across the ground. They struggled in the dirt. The old man surprisingly strong, driven by desperation. But Thaddeus held on, memories of Martha and Delilah giving him strength. Pastor bit down on Ezra's coat, pulling him away long enough for Thaddeus to shove the older man backward. Ezra fell hard, breath knocked from his chest heaving. Thaddeus stood over him, shovel in hand. Ezra glared up, hate and fear mixing in his eyes. "Go ahead," Ezra hissed, voice ragged. "Do it." But Thaddeus shook his head. "I'm not like you," he rasped. "The truth will bury you deeper than I ever could." Sirens pierced the night, faint at first, then louder, growing closer. Pastor barked, tail wagging once, as if sensing help was coming. Ezra's face paled as the realization sank in. Thaddeus had sent word to the sheriff earlier that evening, unsure what he'd find but knowing he'd need the law before morning. Moments later, deputies rode into the yard, lanterns swinging, boots hitting the ground. They took in the scene quickly: the dug-up grave, the tarnished locket in Thaddeus's hand, and Ezra Crow sitting in the dirt. Defeated. As the deputies led Ezra away, Pastor pressed against Thaddeus's leg, warm and alive, tail low but steady. Thaddeus knelt, burying his fingers in the dog's scruffy coat, whispering a quiet "good boy," voice thick with relief. In the days that followed, Delilah Rhodes's was given the burial she deserved, laid to rest beside Martha in the quiet meadow behind the house. Thaddeus stood by the graves, hat in hand, Pastor sitting faithfully at his side. The barn, once a place of silent dread, felt lighter somehow, its secrets finally brought into the sun. News spread through the county about the rancher whose dog uncovered the truth, how an old dog's stare led to justice long delayed. Folks spoke of loyalty, of family, and the weight of secrets buried too long. Thaddeus found a measure of peace he hadn't known in years. He still saw Martha in quiet moments, her memory softer now, less haunted by unanswered questions. And every night, Pastor lay at the foot of the porch steps, not staring, but resting, as if his watch had finally ended. In the end, it wasn't the barn, the grave, or even Ezra's confession that mattered most. It was a faithful dog's stubborn love that refused to let the past stay hidden. A reminder that sometimes, even when we're afraid to look, the truth finds its way to the surface. And as dawn broke over the ranch, Thaddeus Bell stood quietly by the graves, the cold breeze carrying the scent of wild grass, knowing that some stories end not with violence, but with the courage to face what's buried, and the hope that follows when we finally do.